are two systems of courts?
10, Mississippi.
To the 14th. All right, Secretary of State.
Secretary of State
Deals with everything outside of America.
deals with everything outside.
Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Civics EOC Academy. So today we're going to be talking about the Declaration of Independence. Now, in our last video, we talked about how the British policies, mostly the taxes, and the colonial reactions to them led to the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. Our declaration that we were independent from the British. Now, we know how we were upset about the taxing. There was protests and some violence too. Okay, there was already fighting in Lexington and Concord, and it was time to declare our independence and establish our own country. Those 13 separate colonies, or states if you will, would become the United States under one national government. So today we're going to talk about the actual document itself, which is one of the most famous in the history of the world. This document is continually recited, especially its most famous proclamation that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed with certain inalienable rights, life and liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what makes us unique.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government.
Now, in our last video, we spoke about the Continental Congress, and this was a gathering of delegates or representatives from the various colonies who had come together in Philadelphia to decide what to do about our problems with the British. Okay, we discussed how fighting had already taken place in Lexington and Concord, and in June of 1776, the delegates chose 3 of their members, one who was already well known, and that was Benjamin Franklin, and 2 who would go on to become famous and among our first presidents, and that was John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Now, Adams decided that Jefferson should write the text, those famous words of which he would be forever remembered. And those words would be released to the colonies and to the world on July 4th, 1776. Now, I know this is a date that some people say should be celebrated on July 2nd when it was voted on, or in August when it was signed, but July 4th is our celebration of our Declaration of Independence. So let's look at exactly what we need to know about this document, which leads us to our benchmark. Analyze the ideas, and those ideas are natural rights and the role of government, and the complaints set forth in the Declaration of Independence. Now, I have underlined natural rights, role of government, and complaints, and these are the 3 main things that we need to master. So the Declaration can be broken down into 5 main sections. Some people put the first 2 together, and we'll go over these in some detail, but I would recommend writing these down as a list first. And these sections are the introduction, which describes why the colonists are breaking up with England. Second is the preamble, and this is the famous section that most people know. It contains our natural rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, how our government should be set up through consent of the government, and a description of what happens when government becomes bad. And this is the section that contains 2 out of the 3 things that we need to master. Next comes the grievances. And grievances is a word we defined in one of our last videos as formal complaints. And these were directed towards the king, King George III. After this is what I call the justifications section, which kind of explains how we tried to be cool with all the evil things the king was doing, but that didn't really work. And finally, the conclusion, which says, hey, Britain, it's over, we are done. Okay, so the introduction says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. In other words, sometimes two peoples have to go their own ways. And then it says they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Okay, so the intro is saying the U.S. is going to separate or start their own country, and this document is going to explain why. Following the introduction, we get into the good stuff, the preamble, which starts out by saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this is one of the most famous sentences ever written. This is the sentence that's quoted by world leaders and celebrities alike. So let's take a further look at it. This is the sentence that also contains the natural rights we discuss in the benchmark. So let's break down the vocabulary and the meaning of this famous sentence. First of all, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Now, self-evident is kind of like saying this is obvious, but it wasn't obvious at the time. Okay? And next, that all men are created equal. Now, this powerful little statement seems obvious to us today, although we would probably add women. However, women at the time were not treated equally, nor was a huge percentage of the population. And remember, this is a time where there was slavery in America, okay? In fact, the author of the document himself, Jefferson, owned slaves. He did want to include a passage about getting rid of slavery in the document, but this was an incredibly powerful statement at the time. And even though it wasn't necessarily true, it was like a goal. Think of this as a goal for the country, somewhere we would like to be at some point. And this was incredibly powerful because, there was a rigid system of hierarchy. That means there was different classes, different levels of people, especially in Europe, where most people in America had come from. Okay, so again, this was a really powerful statement. Okay, next, that they are endowed by their Creator. And endowed means to be given something, and Creator in this case was God, okay? And for the men of the Enlightenment, as well as today, their Creator was a way of saying that the following rights were given to man by God, not governments. And therefore, these rights that he's about to list are the natural rights. Okay, again, our benchmark. And what were these rights? These rights were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I hope these words were familiar to you before our last video, and that hopefully now we see the inspiration that philosopher John Locke was to Thomas Jefferson, which we're going to review in a minute. But these are the natural rights that Thomas Jefferson said should be provided to everyone. Life, liberty, which means freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. And these rights were not given to us by government, but by God or nature. They are, again, natural rights. And not only that, but these are unalienable rights. The word unalienable means rights that cannot be taken away. Okay, I kind of skipped through that last, but unalienable rights are rights that can't be separated from us. Okay, so our next part begins to explain the second part of the benchmark, which is the role of the government, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, just normal people, deriving their just or fair powers from the consent of the governed. So the first part, to secure these rights, explains that this is why we have government, to protect our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And not only that, but that these governments get their power from the consent of the governed, or the people. We are the governed. And when we give our consent, consent is a word which means permission. Okay, that means that the power comes from us. And Jefferson goes on to state that this power, if abused, can be taken away by the people. Now, in a previous video, we discussed John Locke's notion of what was called the social contract, the idea that the people are the source of government power, and that we give that power to the government to protect, as Locke would have said, life, liberty, and property, almost exactly the words that Jefferson said, right? So this is not only the purpose of the government to protect our natural rights, but we are the ones that give government that power through the social contract. Okay, let's take a closer look at this. Again, this is our comparison between John Locke and Jefferson. John Locke talked about natural rights. Thomas Jefferson described these as unalienable rights. Locke said these rights are life, liberty, and property. And Jefferson changed it up a little bit to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, whereas John Locke talks of the social contract, we talk about consent of the governed. Now, because the people have given their consent, and in an age when most of Europe lived under kings and the people had very little say in their government, Jefferson continues and explains what happens, quote unquote, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute a new government. He goes on to talk about despotism. Despotism is an evil government. Not only is it the right of the people to throw off such a government, but it is their duty to provide a new government. Okay, so just looking a little closer at that, to alter means to change, and to abolish means to destroy. Despotism, again, is when a leader abuses their power, so a despot is like an evil leader. Now, I've seen an E.O.C. question that described protests in Egypt a couple of years ago, in which the people overthrew their government, and asked which section of the Declaration, this was the E.O.C. question, which section of the Declaration would kind of agree with what the people in Egypt were doing. And the answer was, quote unquote, to alter or abolish the government. So make sure you know this. This is a possible test question. Okay, so our next section, when I know we spent a lot of time on the preamble, but there's only one other section we need to really know, and that is the grievances. Okay, now I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but I recommend you spend some time with these grievances and read them. So what did evil King George III do? And it's significant that Jefferson focused the complaints at the king, saying he did this and he did that. Okay, so what did King George do? Well, he has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate pressing importance. In other words, not only will he not let us pass our own laws, but he won't pass laws to help us. What else won't he won't give us representation in Parliament, okay? We kind of know that one. And that one especially makes us mad for imposing taxes on us without our consent. This is taxation without representation, right? Okay, and these are kind of the grievances about laws and lawmaking power. Again, he won't let us pass our own laws, all right? He has suspended or dissolved our legislatures, which we call assemblies, and that's that picture up in the left, okay? And not only that, he won't give us representation in Parliament. That's Parliament at the bottom there. All right, and this leads to our famous battle cry, no taxation without representation. Now, Another big section of our complaints is about courts, okay? He wouldn't let us, now we had courts, but he starts taking this away, okay? And he won't let us set up our own courts. And his courts that he does have over here has taken away some basic rights, like trial by jury. He not only takes away trial by jury, but he starts to ship people over to England to be tried. Okay, not just the colonists, but also royal officials. So if you are a colonist and you're shipped all the way across the ocean to England, are you going to get a fair trial over there? Probably not. And the royal governors and the royal officials who were over here in the colonies, when they committed crimes, they would be sent back to England for their trials. They wouldn't let us try them here. So are those guys going to have a trial over there that's going to represent our interests? Probably not. They're probably going to get off easy. Now, to make matters worse, our last area of grievances or complaints is that the king is basically fighting a war against us already. Okay? Now, the first part, he cut off our trade with other nations, and that's not really about war, but it's a basic thing that makes us angry. All right, but we went over this last time. He's already sent over his army and is making us quarter them here. All right, these are the standing armies that are here without our consent. By the way, he has sent over what are known as mercenary troops, and mercenary troops were troops from other countries, which he sent here to help fight us and keep us in line. All right, and he has quote unquote burnt down our towns and destroyed the lives of our people. So it's basically war is already being fought against us. So why would we not declare our independence? All right. And this leads us to our conclusion. This is basically saying, hey, we are now quote unquote free and independent states, or one big United States, and that all connections to Great Britain are now being dissolved, and that we should be able to declare war. And of course, this declaration meant just that. It would take 8 years of war until we would be truly almost free of the British. We had another little fight with them in 1812, and it took us a little while to get them out of here. But we were now the United States, ready to create our own national government. And that is where we will pick up next time. I hope you learned a little something. Please be sure to subscribe for more videos, and thanks for watching, scholars.